He is the CEO of the NITI Aayog, the government's apex policy think tank, an outstanding former bureaucrat who has an extraordinary track record in policy formulation and implementation. He is one of the key architects of the Make in India, Startup India and Incredible India campaigns. He was also the driving force behind the extremely successful God's Own Countries campaign for the government of Kerala. He has been the driving force behind Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, the Japan Plus team and an interministerial committee for the US to fast-track investments from these two major FDI sources. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting Amitabh Kant.
The Honorable Minister, Mr. Babul Supriyo, Mr. Munjal, Mr. Jalan, Mr. Pai, Rekha, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, 2 days back, Sunil called me up and said that, we are doing this function and do you mind being the substitute speaker? So, I've had a long association with AIMA and promptly agreed, so I'm like Einstein's driver. Einstein had won the Nobel Prize and he was going around giving lectures. He'd given over 300 lectures in UK. And wherever he would go, his driver used to accompany him. So this driver had heard him 300 times, speech after speech after speech. And then Einstein was invited to the University of Columbia in USA where nobody had seen Einstein. So this driver said, nobody has seen you, I've heard you 300 times, you're a very slow speaker. Actually, I can give a better speech than what you can give. So they went to Columbia and Einstein said, okay, you speak. So this guy sat on the dais with the dean and the vice chancellor, and Einstein sat on the floor, on the chairs in front, and he gave a brilliant speech. The driver gave a flawless speech. It was a absolutely scintillating speech, standing ovation he got. And it was actually a better speech than what Einstein could have ever given. But then after the speech, the dean said that, ladies and gentlemen, now we'll have a question-answer session. And he turned to the brightest, the most brilliant, the genius of the class. And this guy got up and asked him a really tough, very complex, very complicated question. And this driver said that, gentlemen, your question is so easy, so easy, so easy that even my driver sitting in the audience can reply. So I'll reimagine India, but if you have any question, please turn to Mr. Sunil Munjal. And then on top of that, Rekha called me up and said that, will you please send your PowerPoint presentations? So I said that I don't do any PowerPoint presentation, and nor do I give any prepared speeches. So she asked me why. So I told her, I'd just come to Government of India. Actually, I was Secretary Tourism in Kerala. And I just got posted to Government of India. And Mr. Jagmohan then was my Minister, Tourism. So he said that, and as soon as I landed up here, there was a Chief Minister's meeting. And there used to be, Vigyan Bhavan, Prime Minister sits on top, Chief Minister sit around. And I narrated as a story that, so Mr. Jagmohan said, beta, tum chalo, sare papers le lo, mere saath chalo. So I accompanied him, and that was my first experience to Government of India and to how government functions in Delhi. And so Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. He was sitting on the dais on top. And he was moderating the discussions, and the chief ministers, they all come with prepared speeches that circulate. Printed speeches circulated, then they are read out alphabetically. So the first was A, Andhra Pradesh. Mr. Chandrababu Naidu read out his speech. He finished it. Then came B, Mr. Lalu Prasad Yadav from Bihar. He started reading out his speech. He read the first para. As soon as he finished the first para, Mr. Mulayam Singh Yadav from the other side got up. He was Chief Minister of UP, and he said, sir, point of order, point of order. So Mr. Vajpayee said, he was the Prime Minister, he said, Mulayam ji, point of order to Parliament mein hota hai, yahan to Chief Minister's Conference mein to nahi hota. He said, aap baith jaiye. So Mr. Lalu Yadav kept repeating his second speech, second para, third para. He got on to the third para. Again, Mr. Mulayam Singh Yadav got up and said, point of order, sir, point of order. So he said, बताइए क्या बात है, आप डिस्टर्ब कर रहे हैं, बताइए. तो he said, साहब क्या बताएं, ये तो मेरी स्पीच पढ़ते जा रहे हैं, मैं क्या पढ़ूंगा. So that was my first exposure to Government of India. So I asked also Sunil that why are you asking me to give this keynote address, because I've worked in both North and South Block. And between the two blocks, we managed to block just about everything in government. But since he was so insistent, I readily agreed. So ladies and gentlemen, the little bit of drip in growth, but irrespective of that, I think India is growing at about 7.6% per annum. It remains an oasis of growth in the midst of a very barren economic landscape across the world. But the challenge for India, I think, is to grow at much higher rates of about 9 to 10% year after year, for 3 decades or more, to be able to lift a very, very young population above the poverty line. And I think the key advantage we have is that we are passing through a window of demographic transition, which rarely happens in history. 72% of our population is below the age of 32, very light dependency burden. But if India is to grow at those high rates, what do we need to do? And how do we reimagine India 3 decades later, growing at rapid pace, lifting people above poverty line? And I think the first and foremost thing is that over the last 70 years, we've made India a very, very complex, very complicated, and a very, very difficult place to do business in. So we've added a lot of regulations, procedures, paperwork, laws. A lot has been added just simply in terms of the bureaucracy around. And therefore, we need to dismantle a lot of this. And I think the first and foremost thing about reimagining India is that we need to make India very, very easy, very, very simple, so that many of you sitting in the audience can create wealth and take India forward. And I think in the last 3 years, this government has tried to do that. 1,200 laws have been scrapped. You can register a company in 1 day. You can actually do an MSME registration in 10 minutes. You can, the number of forms for export imports have been brought down from 12 and 11 to just 3. But India is a very large country. It's bigger than 24 countries of Europe, and therefore the important thing is that the same zeal and spirit must be pushed forward in states. And one of the things we've tried to do is to make states compete with each other. So first year, on 100 outcomes, when we did the ranking of states on ease of doing business, Gujarat came number 1. But let me tell you, don't start clapping, because the very next year, Gujarat got knocked out. It got knocked out by Telangana and Andhra. New state, tremendous energy, just knocked out Gujarat. But the good thing was that states like Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh did a lot of reforms, a huge amount of reforms, labor reforms, ease of doing business, tremendous. They came 4th and 5th. And my view is that this competitive spirit needs to be pushed in a very big way. And that's why when I came to NITI Aayog, one of the first things we are doing is to make states compete on improving learning outcomes, on education, on health. And unless education and health doesn't improve, it's not possible for India to grow at high rates. So education, health, management of water index, agriculture production, all these we are monitoring and ranking states on the change during the course of the year, not on historical outcomes. So then Kerala will keep coming number 1 on education and health. But we create a baseline, then manage the change during the course of the year, capture the delta, the change, and then rank. And therefore, my view is that we have to make states compete with each other in a very big way to make India easy and simple and to make states excel. And let me tell you that unless 7 states of India on the eastern part of India and on the northern part of India and about 201 districts of India do not change, radically transform, radically, it'll be very difficult, and you need to transform them, because you can't have a scenario where 40% of the students are not able to do, in class 5, are not able to do class 2 addition, subtraction, or they are not able to read their mother tongue of class 2, or 33% of the stunted children come from India, of the 33% of the stunted children of the world come from India, India can't grow at those rapid pace. And therefore, my belief, great belief is that 7 states of India, 201 districts of India are actually holding India backwards, and you need to transform them. Without their transformation, it will be very difficult for India to grow. And I think the key there is really to focus very strongly and create a huge competitive spirit amongst them to transform them. That's really the key. So we need to make India easy, simple, we need to make states compete, and we need to push the boundaries as far as these states and these districts are concerned. The second important thing on reimagining India is that we are living in a globalized world, and whether we like it or not, globalization, irrespective of the talk of protectionism, will continue unabated. And all countries which have grown at rapid pace, and post-World War II, several countries have grown at 10% plus for long periods of time. Japan, Korea, China, all of them have grown on the back of globalization. They've grown on the back of exports. And therefore, India must become a very integral part of the global supply chain. And unless we don't do this, very consciously do this, it'll be very difficult for India to grow. You know, you can't grow without exports, you can't grow without penetrating global markets, and you can't grow without size and scale and the ambition and hunger to penetrate global markets. If anybody tells you that you can do this on the back of domestic market, he's talking nonsense, because let me tell you that whatever you are getting in the domestic market, 10x of that you will get on the export market. And therefore, no country in the world, however big or small it is, has never been able to grow for long periods of time without penetrating global markets. And Indians must have that hunger, that ambition to penetrate global markets. And therefore, whatever we do, we must do to excellence, and we must do to global size and scale. It's important. And therefore, India must become a very, very integral part of the global supply chain. And each one of the products that we are getting in, each one of these areas that we are getting in, it's important to do this. We've opened up our economy. FDI has been opened up in a vast range of areas, from defense to insurance to just about every area. And our foreign direct investment has actually grown in the last 3 years by 61%. A whopping 61% at a point of time when FDI across the world has fallen by 16%. So we should continue opening up both on investments and on trade. It's important to do this. And I don't think as Indians we need to fear this as long as we believe in quality and excellence. So we need to push this. The third important point I want to make is that how India embraces the process of urbanization is important if you want to reimagine India. Because whether we like it or not, every minute there will be 30 Indians who will move from rural areas to urban areas. If you go by the latest McKinsey study, by 2050 you will have 700 million additional Indians getting into the process of urbanization. And this will be the biggest movement of people from rural areas to urban areas, even something which even China had not seen. And therefore, it's important, and that's why someone like C.K. Prahalad said that India needs 500 new cities of 1 million each, so to accommodate 500 million. He was looking at the future then. And he told CII then to focus on urbanization. And it's important to understand this, that when the Western world urbanized, land, gas, and water were cheaply available. And because they were cheaply available, America had the luxury of living in New Jersey, traveling to New York, guzzling gas, creating limousines, or creating cities like Atlanta, where 99.9% of the people travel by car. So Americans created cities for cars and not for people. But they created the most polluting cities of the world. And therefore, important thing for India is that the process of urbanization has ended across America, it's ended across Europe, it's ended across China, but the process has just begun in India. And India will actually do more urbanization and more construction in the next 5 to 6 decades than what it has done in the last 5,000 years. But the challenge is that when we do this, we need to unlearn the process of what the Americans have done, and we need to do it in a far more innovative and sustainable manner. And a lot of lessons of that come from the eastern part of the world, not the western part of the world, on how Singapore has done compact, dense urbanization on the back of public transportation, on how Yokohama was able to reduce waste by almost 40%. One mayor, by segregation at household level, reduced waste by 39.8%. How Kitakyushu, which drove the manufacturing of Japan, and where the women of Kitakyushu rose in revolt. They worked in partnership with NITI to make it one of the smartest cities where everything is recycled. Or Curitiba, where you can get a bus in 3 minutes from your walking distance of your house. And therefore, how we shape the process of urbanization in the coming years, and whether we like it or not, this is inevitable. And how we shape it in an innovative and sustainable manner. How do we recycle our water? How do we recycle our waste? How do we use public transportation will be extremely critical. And therefore, I think this government's drive towards 100 smart cities, its drive towards creating the new corridors, which will enable goods to move from Delhi to Mumbai, which it takes 14 days, within 14 hours when the DFC comes up and the dedicated freight corridor comes up by 2018 end. This is a drive towards smart urbanization on how do we use technology to leapfrog, on which I'll come a little later. So urbanization will be very critical. Innovative and sustainable urbanization. The fourth critical thing for reimagining India is to understand that there's a lot of young energy, vibrancy, and dynamism which is presently happening in India, which many of us are not able to comprehend. I was talking to the director, IIT Mumbai, who told me that this year, out of the people who passed out their BTech, almost 40% have either joined a startup or done their own startup. So you're seeing a very different movement. I mean, rarely have you seen one young girl who's taught 9 million Indians how to speak English through her app called Hello English. One young girl, somebody in Jaipur, Pranshu Bhandari. 9 million Indians, no school, no college has done this. I mean, you've seen an example of a startup called Mitra Biotech who relocated from Silicon Valley into Bangalore to do personalized cancer care, remarkable technological breakthrough. Or you look at Consio Medical, and I was not aware that 100 million people in the world suffer from stool management, and 16 million people from India suffer from it. The inverter adapter, which they invented, was actually accepted by AIMS, Fortis, Escort as being exported, and Consio Medical is finding a solution to stool problems of the people of the world. Or you look at young women entrepreneurs like Meena Ganesh or Shanti Mohan or Radhika Agarwal, all of them, remarkable work which these women are doing as startups. Or look at a startup on education, Baiju. Mark Zuckerberg comes and invests in a startup on education. So you're seeing or look at Ather Energy. You know, young boys studying in IIT, Chennai go and start a company for making scooters, electric scooters, smart electric scooters, which has the potential to be the Tesla of the scooter world of the future. So what is happening in the startup world is amazing amount of disruption, amazing amount of unique things. Now the Western world has always innovated. The Western world has innovated. It has innovated for war machines, it has innovated for driverless cars, and actually the Silicon Valley has the highest number of innovators with the least number of problems. No challenges, no problems, but they keep innovating. And they keep innovating for issues which are non-issues to my mind, whereas India has all the challenges, all the problems, all the issues. I mean, you have challenges of providing water, which is free from fluoride and arsenic, water. You have challenges of ensuring that your farmers get seed and fertilizer based on soil and weather conditions on a real-time basis. You have challenges of vast amount of garbage which needs to be converted into electricity. So India needs innovation. And let me tell you, India needs innovation for India's sake. And if we are able to find innovation for much of this, we'll be able to find solution not for the 1 billion people of India, but actually for the 7 billion people of the world who will move from poverty to middle class in the next 2 decades. So your market is not 1 billion, but the 7 billion people of the world if you make India a very innovative society. And therefore, how we push for innovation based on the problems of India is critical. And that's important. I think the next point I want to make is that much of this, what is happening, India has demonstrated its great ability to do great frugal engineering. I mean, you look at a lot of innovation which has taken place for the world. Look at GE. I mean, GE comes and does an ECG machine here for $3,000, which they do for $35,000 in the United States of America. It has enabled them to do a ECG for $1 as compared to $35 in the United States. Look at John Decree's 60 HP tractor, all innovated in India. You look at Philips' low-cost sound recording machine, or Honeywell's turbocharger, all innovated in India, or Microsoft's Bing, all innovated in India for the globalized market. So it's not just that in the last 4 to 5 years, you've seen over 700 multinational corporations relocating their R&D centers into India, but India itself has demonstrated its ability to do great innovation, entrepreneurship, and skill, and doing frugal engineering, which very well is demonstrated in what our ability to put our orbiter around Mars at 1/10 the cost of what the Western nations have done, 1/10 the cost. And therefore, you have a scenario where a company like Renault, which has never ever in its 118 years history, never ever in its 118 years history, ever designed or manufactured a car outside Europe. 4 years back, it comes to Chennai, it puts up a factory, innovates, designed, manufactured a car called the Renault Kwid, which it is now exporting to 43 countries across the world. Or Hyundai, which came looking at the domestic market, but is exporting 60%, 59.8% or something of its production to 123 countries of the world. So India has demonstrated its great ability of great frugal engineering in automobile, auto components, pharmaceuticals, many areas, and we need to push the limits on many, many more areas. And that's important. I think the last point I want to make is that how we use technology to leapfrog will be critical. The important thing is that we have been a very reluctant urbanizer. We have been a very reluctant user of technology. And how India uses technology to leapfrog will be the real challenge for India. Another 3 decades later, for me, India is the only country in the world which has 1 billion biometric. It's the only country in the world with 1 billion mobile. It's the only country in the world with 1 billion bank account. I mean, 290 billion bank accounts, so 290 million bank accounts added in a very short period. And therefore, India has this unique ability. I mean, I use my mobile to do all my bank transfers. I do it for all my merchant transactions. And therefore, my personal belief is that India will be the first country in the world. When I use a credit card, I pay 3.5%. When I use a debit card, I pay 1.5%. But when I use my Bhim Aadhaar on my mobile, I pay 0. I use my biometric, I use my own mobile. It's a 0 cost of transaction. So India will disrupt in a very big way, and that's why you have 900 financial technology startups in India. We are in the midst of some of the biggest transactions which will take place thanks to the Jam Trinity and thanks to the India Stack. And this will happen. India has the potential to make ATMs, debit cards, credit cards, all technologically redundant in 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years, nobody will talk about it. We'll all be doing all our transactions through mobile. Because the cost of transaction and the cost of mobile itself. I mean, we have 450 million smartphones, but the cost at which mobile smartphones are being sold now and are being given away, are being sold, will enable India to have 1 billion smartphones in the next 3 to 4 years, 1 billion smartphones in 4 years' time. And the cost of acquisition, which India has demonstrated, because you're not doing paperwork, you're not doing eKYC, it's all being done through Aadhaar. Many years back, I worked in the fisheries sector in Kerala. It was a nightmare. I was trying to provide new technology. For 3-4 years, I struggled. New technology, outboard motors I provided, new fishing nets I provided, new crafts I provided. It was impossible to open bank accounts for them. It was a nightmare to open physical bank accounts through physical banks, through bank managers. I went to Federal Bank Onam lunch a week back. My bank account was opened in 55 seconds flat. 55 seconds to open my bank account using my biometric. Therefore, we are in the midst of the biggest transition which the world has ever seen. Whether you like it or not, we are not recognizing this radical transformation. But look at what has been happening. I mean, a new company like Reliance Jio comes in, acquires about 150 million customers in flat 4 months' time. 150 million customers. The cost of acquisition is $1. Compared to $25 to $30 in the Western world. $25 to $30 in the Western world, you're doing an acquisition for $1. It's unbelievable what is happening, actually. So you are in the midst of one of the biggest technological transition, and we need to push these limits in many, many areas of using technology to push the change in a very big way. And actually, it's technology which would propel us into the future. And if you want to reimagine an India which is innovative, which is sustainable, which is technology-driven, and which is able to lift a vast segment of our population using technology and making them live a very far more sustainable means of livelihood. I think, to my mind, we are in the midst of very exciting times. We are living these exciting times, and we must be all a very integral part of these very challenging times of transforming India. But there are various challenges as well. And the challenges are, first and foremost, to my mind, it's very important to understand that India can't grow without gender parity. You know, in India, only 24% of our GDP comes from women. The worldwide average is about 48%. And therefore, we need to push a conscious policy of gender parity. Without women becoming major players in our economy, it will be very difficult for India to grow. It's important to do that. Secondly, it's very important to have predictability, consistency, and clarity of policies over a long period of time. That's important. India, quite often, we get into areas where we lose predictability and consistency. We need to have that predictability and consistency over a 3-decade period. And thirdly, I am a great believer that it will be very difficult for India to do this till we don't get our size and scale right, until we are not able to grow our exports and penetrate global markets. It's important to do this. Let me conclude with a 14th century poet. He was a Muslim. His ancestry was Turkish. He wrote in the Persian language. And that was he was talking about 14th century India, and that was Amir Khusro. And he said, how exhilarating is the atmosphere of India. There cannot be a better teacher than the way of life of its people. If any foreigner comes by, he'll have to ask for nothing, because they treat him as their own and teach him how to smile like a flower. So he talked about optimism. He talked about smiling like a flower. He talked about treating people as their own. And I think what India needs to do is to just have optimism, have the courage, the guts, and the determination to push for change, and that change through technology will enable India to grow rapidly at high rates. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.